Morning, everyone. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Recolight webinar. Today we're talking the waste regs and the new changes and the extensions to those regulations. And we're going to take a deep dive into all of those. We have a stellar lineup of speakers as usual. We have John Rowe. Could we go back to the first slide, Suzanne? Yeah, so we have John Redmayne. He's the Managing Director of ERP UK. They are environmental compliance experts. We have Aaron Moon. He's a Senior Policy Advisor in the Simpler Recycling Department at DEFRA in the UK government. And we have Nigel Harvey, Chief Executive of Recolight. So Aaron is going to dive into the simpler recycling regulations, and you may remember a bit of a political furore a couple of years back when Rishi Sunak said he was getting rid of the 7 bins, and this was proposals for separation of waste for households and businesses, and Aaron is going to tell us how that's all been simplified. John is going to take a deep dive into the extended producer responsibility. Now, this is packaging, and some companies that were not covered by this are going to be covered by this in the future. And there's going to be fees and reporting and all that type of thing. He's going to tell us all about that. And Nigel is going to specifically look at online regulations, and online suppliers have been brought into scope of regulations, and he's going to tell us all about that and the implications for anyone who sells online. We'll take questions after that, comments. So please join in and quiz our speakers. That's what they're expecting it, and we aim to finish between 12 and 12:30. We are recording today's event, and that will be posted eventually on our webinars page. You will get the slides for today. You will get an email on MailChimp, and that will have all the slides. You should get that either today, later today, or by lunchtime tomorrow. Check your spam folder if you haven't seen it. Now we've 2 boxes at the bottom on Zoom. There's a chat box and there's a Q&A box. Now in the chat box, if you put any admin stuff or any technical issues or anything like that, Susanna's monitoring that, so pop those in there. If you've got questions for the speakers and about the topic today, please put those in the Q&A box, and that's the box that I and the speakers will be monitoring, and we'll be answering questions from those. But please, we're here to answer questions. We're here to send you away with learnings. So please comment and question there, and we'll get through as many as we can. Today is the 3rd Recolight webinar this year. We had two already this year, and you can go back and see those on playback. Basically, go to the recolight.co.uk website and just follow the links for the webinar, and you can fast forward and stop and view and see them all there. We looked at life cycle assessments for lighting products earlier this year. We had Max Robson, who's the environmental metrics manager at Recolight, talking about that. We had Martin McGranagan of One Click LCA, and we had lighting designer John Bullock, and that was on. So we took a deep dive into life cycle assessments, EPDs, all that type of thing. On the 6th of March, we looked at the British standard for remanufacturing, 8887, and we had Simon Fisher of FMARC and Kevin Stubbs, who's a member of the BSI Committee on Remanufacturing, and Nigel were on that. And then upcoming, we have on the 15th of May, we're looking at designing sustainable luminaires, light fittings to get good ratings on TM66, TM65, and get good EPDs. And Simon Fisher joining us. We have Dave Hollingsby of Stone Lighting. So that should be really interesting. So that's the 15th of May at 11 o'clock, and you can register by going on recolight.co.uk following the links. We have an in-person conference next month, the Net Zero Lighting Conference. Places are still available. This is where we're looking at how lighting manufacturers can address their own carbon footprint, how they can deal with scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And You know, what's great about this, I think, is that we're looking at some great lighting companies who have done amazing things. We're looking especially like Thorn Lighting at their Spennymoor plant have done lots of interesting measures. We'll be looking at that. We're also looking outside the industry at Beco Appliances and Triton Showers, who are going to share their learnings and their journey and the achievements that they have done. They're quite similar businesses, I would say, to lighting companies. And we're also going to look at environmental certifications. So we're talking B Corp, 𝗃𝗶𝗴𝗵𝗁, etc., etc. And you know, are they worth it? Are they something you should be addressing? Is there a market need? And we'll also be looking at public sector procurement. A lot of various elements of the public sector are now talking about circularity, bringing in circularity just on you know, on the highway side, on NHS, local authorities. A lot of these are dialing up their environmental requirements for suppliers. So come along to that. It's a one-day event in Waterloo in London on the 29th of April. To book your place, recolight.co.uk, follow the links. Circular Lighting Report also keeps you in touch with developments in sustainability in lighting. I edit this. We do you know, we do almost a daily story about developments. We do interviews with thought leaders, etc. And again, if you just go to Recolight, click on news, you can also follow us on LinkedIn. And our big event is Circular Lighting Live, which is on the 25th of September 2025. So please save the date for that. We've got a bigger, better venue this year. We're in the Minster building in the City of London. We've got lots of new features and formats. So yeah, so put that in your diary and keep an eye out. We'll be announcing speakers and some of the topics throughout the year, but just to get that in your diary. Okay, right. I'm going to hand over to Aaron, and Aaron's going to tell us about how recycling regulations got simpler.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Ray. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. Hopefully you can see my slides there now. So as Ray mentioned, I'm Aaron. I work in Simpler Recycling, and specifically I work on the introduction of the reforms to workplaces. So to start, I just wanted to recap on what Simpler Recycling means. So currently in England, there's no legal requirement on businesses or non-domestic premises to separate dry recycling or food waste. And with the introduction of Simpler Recycling, which is next Monday, that's going to change. So the separation of waste will become a legal requirement. So this will start with small, medium and large workplaces. So there's any workplaces that have more than 10 full-time equivalent employees. And then there's a slightly later implementation date of the 31st of March 2027 for microfirms. So those are workplaces that have less than 10 full-time equivalent members of staff. So what this will mean is that you'll need to separate dry recycling, which is plastic, metal and glass, paper and cardboard, food waste, and you can still have your kind of residual non-recyclable waste stream as well. So moving on, I want to touch on why the government are introducing Simpler Recycling. So you might be aware that in England, the recycling rate has been largely stagnant, around 43% in previous years. And the government has a target to increase this by to 65% by 2035. So the introduction of Simpler Recycling will be an important component of increasing that. And the reason we want to increase recycling is it will reduce the amount of waste that's going to landfill and incineration, and therefore reduce the amount of carbon emissions and support the net zero targets. But it will also support the growth of the UK recycling industry and create green jobs, which will support the UK economy as well. So this slide kind of provides a bit more detail on how you'll need to present the waste streams. So the default for Simpler Recycling is that you'll have one container for dry mix recycling, which will contain glass, metal and plastic. Then you'll have a separate container for paper and card. And the reason for this is that by separating paper and card, it increases the recyclability of those materials, ensures that they can be used to make new products, and generally is kind of preferred by the recycling industry. Then you have a separate waste stream for your food waste, and as I mentioned before, still having your residual waste stream as well. However, I should note that in some instances, your waste collector may determine that it's not technically or economically practicable or of no significant environmental benefit to have paper and card as a separate waste stream. In those instances, they can conduct a co-collection assessment and collect paper and card with the other mixed recyclables. So in that instance, you would only have 3 separate waste streams, so mixed recycling, food waste, and residual waste. I should also mention that some waste collectors will have their own preferences. So some will choose to have separate glass as a waste stream. So that's why it's really important in the first instance to discuss the requirements with your waste collector to understand what processes they'll have in place and how that suits kind of your workplace. And of course, you have the freedom to procure a different waste collector if you feel you need a different service to what they're able to provide. On this slide, I want to cover in more detail the types of materials that are in scope and out of scope for simple recycling. So the focus of simple recycling is on household-like materials. So, for example, in the plastics waste stream, we're focused on things like drinks, bottles, pots, tubs and trays, materials that you'd probably be familiar with at home. We're not interested, or it's not in scope to collect kind of byproducts from manufacturing, such as offcuts or other plastic waste that's generated from manufacturing. So in the context of, say, if you're manufacturing lighting, any glass that's, say, broken or needs to be recycled or disposed of isn't in scope of simple recycling. However, that's not to say that you can't have a recycling service in place for those materials. It's just that it's not a legal requirement to comply with simple recycling. Then a bit more detail on the food waste requirements. So the requirement to separate food waste applies to all workplaces. It's not just focused on, for example, restaurant or cafes. So if you have a canteen, or even if just a staff area, or if members of staff are eating on their lunch breaks, any food waste that's generated by the premises will need to be separately collected for recycling. And there's no minimum weight threshold. So in Wales, they have a 5 kilogram per week de minimis. That isn't part of the legislation in England. So any food waste that's that's generated will need to be separately collected. So workplaces do have the flexibility to determine how often the waste needs to be collected. So in instances where you're, say, generating small amounts of food waste, you might choose to have a fortnightly collection rather than weekly, just to reflect the volumes. Some waste collectors are also providing like smaller services, so caddy-based collections rather than wheelie bins. So again, that might be more appropriate if you're generating small amounts of food waste in your workplace. We've also had quite a few questions around compostable packaging and where that fits within the simple recycling requirements. So compostable packaging shouldn't be collected within the food waste stream, nor should it be collected in the recycling waste stream. So if you do use compostable packaging at your premises, they should either be disposed of as residual waste or through a separate waste collection as agreed with your waste collector. The exception to this is compostable caddy liners. So if you use a compostable liner for your food waste, then that is compliant to go in your food waste bin. The reason for that is that there's concerns around the suitability for recycling. So particularly where compostables are going to mixed material facilities, it's not always possible to separately kind of contain them and then ensure they're treated in the appropriate way. So that's why there wasn't sufficient evidence to include compostables within the simple recycling regime. We've also had quite a few questions around the packaging of food waste. So this might not be as applicable for your types of workplaces, but thinking about, for example, supermarkets, if they're generating volumes of food waste that are packaged, whether they need to remove packaging before it's put into food waste. So we're advising that you should discuss that with your waste collector, as the amount of kind of contamination from plastics will need to be assessed by the waste collector on what they're willing to accept. But just to reiterate that it wouldn't be compliant to dispose of food waste, either packaged or unpackaged, in your residual waste stream. It needs to go for a separate food waste collection. We've also had quite a few questions around public-facing bins and whether these are in scope of simpler recycling. So as public-facing bins will likely generate household-like waste on the operations of the premises, this is in scope of simpler recycling. And there are a few ways that you might choose to manage this waste stream in accordance with the requirements. So firstly, you might look to provide, if you have customer-facing bins, you might look to provide separate bins for each waste stream in accordance with how the arrangements are with your waste collector. And of course, you'll need to provide clear signage and ensure that customers or visitors to your premises know how to separate the materials accordingly. Alternatively, if, say, you're a smaller premises and you only have one customer-facing bin, you might choose just to have one bin and then separate out any obvious kind of recycling or food waste to your back of house collections before it's collected by your waste collector. It might also be a situation where you, as a workplace, you share a waste collection with other businesses, either through a facilities management company, or if you're on, say, like an industrial estate where you have a shared waste contract. So in this instance, the facilities management company or the organisation that are responsible for procuring the waste contract need to ensure that the services that they procure and provide to you are compliant with the requirements. And in terms of when they need to comply, if any of the businesses that are utilising that service have more than 10 full-time or 10 or more full-time equivalent employees, then that will need to comply from the 31st March 2025. If all the businesses within scope have less than 10 full-time equivalent employees, then it would be 31st March 2027. And if it's a mix of the two, then it would be the earlier implementation date, but any micro firms within that arrangement wouldn't necessarily need to comply until 2027. But as they would be benefiting from that collection, it would make kind of sense to use it once it's been procured. So moving on to motivators. So as I've touched on, simpler recycling is a legal requirement, but we think there are lots of other positive reasons why you should look to introduce recycling in your workplace if you haven't already. So firstly, by reducing your waste to landfill or incineration, you'll be reducing your carbon emissions and support the goal to not only reach net zero as a nation, but also any kind of environmental plans or carbon reduction plans that you have as an organisation. And then by advertising your recycling to your customers or visitors, you can demonstrate your company's green credentials, and this will hopefully appeal to your customers. Then by having separated out your waste streams, you may be able to identify where high volumes of waste are being generated by your organisation and look to reduce these wherever possible. For example, if you aren't currently separating food waste, and then when you do move to separate food waste, you notice higher kind of volumes than you expected, that might encourage you to think about other ways you could reduce this. And lastly, by reducing your residual waste collection, you could possibly save money, as residual waste is the most expensive collection. This is obviously subject to your individual workplace's circumstances, so we can't guarantee that every workplace will have a cost saving as a result of introducing simpler recycling, but it is a potential that by kind of optimizing the service that you have and reducing residual waste, you could make a saving. So there are some barriers that stakeholders have approached us with that are kind of slowing down their compliance or preventing them from complying. And these have been broadly categorized into three factors, so cost, space, and time. I won't run through all of these in detail, but we've provided a series of recommendations for how you might overcome these barriers. And I can also touch on in a later slide around some of the guidance that we've provided as well. Yeah, so on this slide, so DEFRA have published a communications toolkit, which provides documents such as a flyer, induction packs, frequently asked questions, all of which will hopefully help you to raise awareness with your employees and potentially customers as well around what the requirements mean and how they will need to comply within the organisation. And we've also worked with WRAP, who are a non-governmental organisation, to develop a business of recycling website. This hosts a plethora of other resources as well, so includes step-by-step guidance, a business waste calculator, which help you to optimize your collections and calculate what a potential collection might cost. It also includes material-specific posters, which will help you to clearly provide signage to your different waste streams for your employees. Obviously, those aren't mandatory, but it might be helpful resources for you. And also includes some templates such as waste audits and action plans to help you on your journey to compliance. So lastly, I want to touch on compliance enforcement and what this will look like for Simpler Recycling. So this will be led by the Environment Agency as they're the regulator for Simpler Recycling. So I'm just speaking on their behalf in this instance. But as you'll hopefully see from this timeline, from the outset, the Environment Agency will be looking to provide advice and guidance rather than go straight to enforcement action. And that's kind of appreciating that some of the policies around Simpler Recycling were kind of delayed due to the election and change of government. So we want to ensure that workplaces have enough time to understand the regulations and look to comply. So in the first instance, they'll provide advice. Then if this advice and guidance was ignored, the Environment Agency could then look to serve a compliance notice. So this is a formal acknowledgement of the non-compliance, and it will outline the steps that are needed, that the business needs to take to comply, and also the time frame by which the Environment Agency expect this should be completed. Then if a compliance notice was ignored by the workplace, at that stage, an offence would be committed. And the Environment Agency can take enforcement action in accordance with their enforcement and sanction policy. This would likely, depending on the severity of the crime, this would likely be criminal prosecution through the courts. And this action can either be taken against the waste producer, so the workplace, or the waste collector, depending on the type of offence that's been committed. But yeah, just to reiterate really that the Environment Agency are very much keen to focus on advice and guidance in the first instance, and want to encourage businesses and help them to comply. So at least kind of in the early phases of Simpler Recycling, compliance enforcement and enforcement action will kind of be a last resort rather than their first approach if they identify non-compliance. I think that concludes my slides, at which point I'm passing over to John, but happy to take questions at the end of the session.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thanks for that, Aaron. Personally, I found that really interesting, and I was already drafting an email to the operators of the shared office environments where ERP have their offices. Anyway, I'm here to talk to you this morning about some of the changes that are going on in relation to packaging and packaging compliance in the UK. So I'll put this onto the slideshow and take you through this. My name is, as per the introduction, my name is John Redmayne. I'm the managing director of a compliance business called ERP UK, and I'll tell you a couple more things about us as well as about this new requirement for small producers. So these are the topics we expect to cover, and as it is a new requirement, it is something that ERP has been looking at how we can support companies with firstly understanding, and this webinar would be part of our outreach to help more companies understand the requirements, but also of course for if you're looking for support, that is something that we could provide. So first of all, in case you don't know us, who are ERP UK? Well, we've been around as ERP for 20 years, and for 10 years as part of a wider group, the Landbell Group. In the UK, we are both compliance specialists operating schemes for packaging, batteries, and WEEE. And we're also data specialists. We have a significant team who have an immense amount of experience in gathering and calculating packaging and other data around products for EPR reporting. And they do that using a sophisticated bespoke packaging weight database. But we are also part of a wider group, the Landbill Group, who are a leading provider of environmental compliance. The group operates more than 40 compliance schemes, largely in Europe, but increasingly around the world. We have more than 38,000 customers. And in summary, we use expertise and data to simplify market access and end-of-life compliance obligations. But today we are talking about the UK and a very specific new piece of legislation and requirement. As always in this sector, we have a new acronym to get the hang of. This one has dodged around a little bit in terms of how people are using it, but it seems to be this small p for packaging and then capitalized EPR for extended producer responsibility. Now, the packaging compliance has been a reality in the UK since 1997. And that was the packaging waste regulations. They have been tweaked and amended over the years, but what we are now experiencing is a wholesale replacement of them by the producer responsibility obligations brackets packaging and packaging waste regulations 2024. Commonly referred to as extended producer responsibility for packaging or packaging EPR. You see why an acronym is very helpful. The requirements were launched as part of a phased approach from 2023, with the regulations being enforced from the end of 2024. Now, they are effectively a replacement for the 1997 for the old packaging regulations. And companies who were obligated under those are almost all obligated under these and will be considered as large producers. I'm aware that there are likely to be some of you on the call today who were large producers, are still large producers, and will already be registered under these new regulations. But what I'm here in principle to talk to you about is a new category which is described as small producers who must register and report. You'll notice there that all they have to do is register and report, whereas large producers have to continue to support recycling by purchasing PRNs, and also a new requirement to pay EPR fees for the collection of household packaging. So the small producers, I would describe it as effectively sending out a wider, throwing out a wider net to try and gather registrations and data from a larger number of companies about the amount of household packaging which is being placed on the market in the UK. And also, of course, it won't be unusual for a small producer in the future, if their business grows, their volumes grow, to become a large producer. And there is then effectively a smoother transition into those requirements. One other point to make, which I think is probably helpful, is that under the old packaging regulations, there was a category of small producer. That category, and those small producers had to, on a simplified basis, report data and support recycling through purchasing PRNs. but they are now all classed as large producers, and this small producer under the new regulations is an entirely new category. For both regulations, companies have to report the amount of packaging which they placed on the market based on their varying and respective activities. As with all these regulations, non-compliance is an offence and enforcement action may be taken. Really helpfully, folks, if this is new to you, the deadline for reporting this information is the 1st of April 2025. It's not for me to say whether that how important that deadline is, but the approach that we tend to see from the agency is that they want more and more companies to come into compliance who are required to by the regulations. So if this is news to you, and you consider your company is caught by this requirement, it is definitely something that you need to look into and progress with getting registered and reporting data. So hopefully by now some of you are puzzling over who is a small producer. A business is classed as a small producer under these regulations if two things apply, or if there is a turnover test, and that's a turnover in the previous financial year for the business, and there is also a volume test, and the old threshold was always 2 million turnover and 50 tons of packaging. This new net is requiring companies in the lower category of 1 million tons of turnover and between 25 and 50 tons of packaging to report. Now, every time I've tried reading that or tried including it in a document, I find it confusing. Helpfully, my team has produced a table, which for me has always proved to be quite a good way of absorbing information. So you can see here a very simple amount of packaging and turnover of the business. So there are lots of companies with smaller turnovers or handling smaller amounts of packaging who still have no obligation to register or report. We still have the companies with over 2 million turnover and over 50 tons here as large producers required to report, register, report, and pay fees. But the new category here of small producers are in this slightly lower thresholds of turnover and or of packaging handled. So I hope that is reasonably clear, and of course these slides will be being shared afterwards. So if you are a small producer, or you think you might be a small producer under these regulations, what do you need to do? What do the regulations mean? Well, small producers only need to make one annual submission in a standard format, reporting on their packaging activities in the UK. Large producers, again, I'm not trying to explain the regulations for those. If that is you, I'm expecting that your compliance scheme will probably have been taking you through the significant changes to the regulations. But small producers will have to, they have to do, large producers have to do 2 reports per year, and small producers just 1. I already mentioned that they're not required to pay fees for the collection of waste or for PRNs, but they are still required to pay a fee to register with the Environment Agency. And in the future, there will be 2 additional reporting requirements, both of which have been we're in the regulations, but implementation of them has been delayed. And that is to report which nation the packaging was sold into. And by that, just to make sure we're really clear, it means the nations within the UK, so Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. And also to report on packaging which the organisation disposes of, known as self-managed waste, which is delayed until July 2026. And this reporting can be done direct to the Environment Agency, or it can be done through a producer compliance scheme. I mentioned in the previous slide some of the detail that has to be reported. And here we'll look in a little bit more detail at the type of data which needs to be reported upon. Again, if you've had to report on packaging data before in the UK, some of these terms and concepts will be reasonably familiar. But if you're new to it, then some of them need a little bit of support and explanation. There are, as there were before, a set of producer activities which are defined and which you have to say which of those your business is active within. And you'll see here a nice a kind of parallel into what Nigel will be talking about later, that there is a category of activity for online marketplace. So those are the producer activities, and here are the types of data which need to be reported on. And as always with regulations, there is quite a lot of devil in the detail. So understanding what is meant by primary, secondary shipment or tertiary packaging, what the definitions of household or non-household packaging are, and some of these terms in terms of materials are quite well established and have been reported on for many, many years. Paper, glass, steel, plastic, wood, which of course includes wooden pallets, an item of packaging many companies forget. But a new category is in there of fiber-based composites. And this is typically a Tetra Pak type beverage carton, which is a composite of plastic, sometimes aluminium foil, and fiber in the form of card. So there is quite a lot of detail to understand in terms of, do the regulations apply, and what data is required, and how can I report. So I mentioned that our teams at in ERP have been looking at how we can support packaging producers with this new requirement, as well as the several hundred companies we currently help with packaging compliance as large producers. And what we're doing is using the combined expertise of our data service and compliance teams to offer a simplified compliance and data reporting service for small producers. We'll help you understand the regulations, get registered if you need to, collect, check, and report the right data, and meet the deadlines, though I suspect we won't be able to get you across the threshold for the 1st of April. But really importantly, we will also help you as your partner to stay informed about further changes to the legislation as they come in. This follows the type of format that we have been supporting companies with data collection in for many years. And data collection is typically rather bespoke to each business because it depends on how you hold data within your company. And that's the starting point that we take with understanding that, analyzing and planning how the data would be collected, what support you might need from us to collect data if there's data that you don't have, to calculate and report, and then to submit and pay the fee for the reports to the Environment Agency. The sort of raw data that companies might have in some form of database or system could look like this. And the EPR format required, sorry, I clicked too quick, is something more like this, that has the materials and the quantities of household and non-household packaging here. So the service is available. Our details are on the website, and at the end of these slides, would provide you with a single main contact, a simple contract to cover the service, an invoice, and a report each year. And that includes the registration fee to the Environment Agency, as well as our time in helping you with reporting. So if that's of interest, do please feel free to contact us afterwards. The details are here. But I hope that is a helpful summary of this new requirement, and will ensure that you can be a little bit more confident as to whether this new aspect of the packaging regulations in the UK will apply to your business or not. So thank you very much, and I will pass over now to you, Nigel.
Thank you very much for that, John. And if you could stop sharing, I'll share my screen.
Certainly. That should be available for you now, Nigel.
Right. Frog in the throat, excuse me. Well, thank you very much for that, John. And as John mentioned, online marketplaces are being brought into the scope of the waste packaging regulations. And it's great that there are also possible plans to bring them into the scope of the WEEE regulations. And this has been a concern at Recolight and others for some time. And it's great at last to be seeing this to the fruition of quite a lot of hard work to try to encourage this to happen. But why are online marketplaces such a concern? Well, this is some research that was done a little while ago, actually, by the WEEE Scheme Forum, and it looked at a series of different records on Amazon UK, and then assessed whether the companies selling the products were actually compliant with the WEEE regulations or not. And you can see the huge level of non-compliant records that we found on this particular website, Amazon UK, but obviously there are a number of other major online marketplaces. LED lamps, 76% of all LED lamps that we looked at were basically not compliant with the WEEE regulations. And when you look at those individual records, the products are usually sold by a business based in Hong Kong, typically, or China, but nevertheless, they're sitting held in a UK warehouse for quick or even next day delivery. Now, for a long time, online marketplaces have been able to successfully say that actually they are not the producer or even the importer of the products. And that is because when you actually buy a product from an online marketplace, the way they usually seem to work is that the contracting entity you're dealing with is the seller based in Guangzhou, let's say. And in fact, that seller in Guangzhou is also, under the way it works with the online marketplace, the importer right into the the warehouse in the UK. And so the importer is based in Guangzhou. The contracting entity you're working with is based in Guangzhou. So it's actually very hard for the Environment Agency to, or any other or enforcement body to try to enforce against such an organization. So it's great that the government is now looking at this, but it has been a long road to WEEE compliance, and we were delighted to be instrumental in a series of seminars organised by Recolight, the European WEEE lighting compliance schemes trade association, to focus on this issue back in 2015, 2016 and 2018. We had representatives from a number of European member state governments coming to those, and as a result, actually, a number of governments in other European countries have started making this mandatory as well, particularly in France and Germany. We in the UK, as Recolight, we sent multiple letters to ministers, had meetings with ministers, and in fact, in 2018, the government of the day committed to online marketplaces compliance with the WEEE regulations, as I say, back in 2018 in their resources and waste strategy. But then events got in the way. First of all, we had Brexit and the huge amount of legal work that DEFRA had to undertake to bring the UK's regulations into make them Brexit ready was enormous, and that got this as a result got pushed back, and COVID did the same. So unfortunately those have both delayed this. But it was great, therefore, in December of last year when the government issued a press release titled "Online Giants to Pay Their Fair Share for Electrical Waste." And so it is happening now. And this is the likely definition that it seems that the government's legislation will use to describe an online marketplace. And it's a website or a mobile application, that's nice, which facilitates the sale. So it's not the sale itself, it facilitates the sale, which again is great, because what it means is that it's capturing those situations where the online marketplace is not the contracting entity, and it's the sale or other supply. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a sale for money. There could be other mechanisms of supply that are also captured, or other supply of goods through the website or mobile application by persons other than the online market operator or marketplace operator. So in other words, it's clearly capturing third-party suppliers. And what is really good is that this definition looks like it'll not just capture organizations like Amazon and eBay and Etsy and Alibaba, but it'll also capture those direct to consumer operators like Temu and Shein, or Shine, however it's pronounced, which are becoming increasingly prevalent. So what might the timelines look like? Well, we understand that an amending statutory instrument is currently being drafted by DEFRA's lawyers and is likely to be laid in Parliament this summer. It'll need to be debated in both the House of Lords and the House of Commons because it's an affirmative piece of legislation. It incidentally will also create a separate category for vapes, because vapes have been a big issue, and this will make sure that vape producers are responsible for financing the vape waste that arises at the moment. The statutory instrument will come into force 21 days after it's made. So let's say, for example, that the regulations are made, I don't know, mid-July or towards the end of July. They would then come into force by mid-August. And that would mean that online marketplaces would then be required to join a WEEE scheme by November, if they're not already in a WEEE scheme, and some already are because they have their own brand product being sold. But if they're not already a member of a WEEE scheme, they will need to join by November, but they will also need to start reporting the sales of product through their online marketplace from the date of coming into force. So from mid-August, let's say. So what are the consequences of that, and what are the impact both for online marketplace and the sellers and for everybody else? So the impact is that online marketplaces will obtain a partial target in 2026. They'll be paying some of the costs in 2026 and all of the costs in 2027. And that is because of this middle of August date. And so by the end of 2025, online marketplaces will have reported roughly, August to December, let's say 5 months worth of data, 5/12. But the way the UK's regulations work is that there is a national target set, and that target is shared up amongst WEEE schemes and therefore amongst producers who are members of those WEEE schemes based on the prior year market share. So obviously, because they've only been reporting 5/12 of a year in 2026, in 2025, the share of the target they will get will only be 5/12 of the target of their share of the target in 26, but they'll get a full target in 2027. So obviously this means costs are going to go up for online marketplaces and for those companies selling through them. And as with anybody, online marketplaces can choose how and if to pass those costs on, but it would be very surprising if they don't pass those on to the companies that are selling through them. And they in turn will almost certainly result in higher end user pricing. And that's great for those companies that are already compliant, that are already paying their fair share of the cost, because it levels the playing field, which is really, really important. And in fact, when I say the end user pricing will be reflected, it wouldn't surprise me at all if online marketplaces actually put a markup on those charges to their sellers, because these companies are very good at maximizing their revenues, and so there will probably be an opportunity for them to do exactly that. But once the online marketplaces are paying their fair share of the target, other WEEE schemes' market shares will reduce. And so their share of the collection targets will drop to a small extent in 26 and to a larger extent in 27. And so that means that there's the opportunity for effectively for everybody else to be paying slightly less, because at last the non-compliant sections selling through online marketplaces are paying their fair share. So the consequence is actually the potential for costs elsewhere to come down, or at least not to go up if other issues are acting on the targets. So we've got a great situation that at long last online marketplaces are being brought into the scope of the WEEE regulations, and what is great is that the level that we're now seeing a level playing field for companies that have for a long time been fighting with one hand tied behind their back. Now at long last, everybody is going to have to pay their fair share of WEEE. So that concludes my presentation. I will stop sharing, and I'll invite my fellow participants to join the screen.
Thank you, Nigel. Really interesting, and thank you, John and Aaron. Right, we've got questions. Let's take them on. First one, an anonymous attendee says, "What are the practical implications or changes, if any, from the simpler waste rules for a wholesaler when they have lots of, say, tertiary packaging to deal with rather than office/household scale packaging?" So, Aaron, that's one for you.
Yeah, that's fine. So if it's things like cardboard packaging or plastic packaging, then that would need to be separated for recycling, regardless of the volume.
Okay. Simple answer. Yeah. Chris Whitemore is saying, in respect to simpler recycling, it was previously confirmed that companies in Wales that produce less than 5 kilos of food waste were exempt. Why is this not included for English-based companies? And if this is a proposal that will be introduced, when is it likely to be actioned?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Chris. So there's no plans to change the requirements in England. So we won't be introducing a de minimis in the legislation. So as I confirmed in the presentation, there's no minimum in England. The reason that that decision was taken when developing the legislation, so as it was initially consulted on, was that it's difficult to determine for a business whether they're producing more than 5 kilograms a week in terms of the Environment Agency for enforcement. And also, if you aggregate the amount of food waste that's generated below 5 kilograms across the whole country, that's actually a very large proportion of the total food waste that's generated by workplaces. So we'll be losing all of that potential kind of food waste to go to composting or anaerobic digestion, which will continue to go to landfill or incineration. So that's the reason why the decision was taken to not have a de minimis in England.
Okay. Greg Bristol is asking, is LDPE in scope for the plastic/mixed recycling element?
Yes, it is. I can, in the follow-up for the presentation, I can share a link to the legislation, which sets out in more detail the materials that are in scope. But yes, LDPE is in scope.
Also from Greg, can you confirm that nation data requirement applies to small producers as well as to large producers? And given the complaints from the hospitality sector and the fact the requirement has already been postponed to 2026, do you think it would be scrapped entirely?
I think that's a question for John, isn't it?
Sorry, yes. Yeah,
nation
I was
say yes.
the national data. I presume, yeah, that's we're talking packaging here, yes.
Yes. I think the question was how will you know? And that is going to be a challenge, and I think is one of the reasons why it has been delayed. But it is because it is a tricky topic, worth explaining why it's in the regulations at all, because it is a bit of a new aspect. And it really relates to the fact that waste is a devolved matter amongst the UK nations, and each nation wants to be able to understand the volume of packaging which is being placed on the market in their country, their nation, rather than just having to make an approximation of a share of the UK total. And with that, how much is placed on the market, of course, if they also then have data on how much is being collected and recycled, they can produce a recycling rate. So that's the purpose, as far as we understand, the major purpose of this element of the reforms. And of course, the expectation is not that there will be a track of each individual item, but if you sell, for example, to a wholesaler in Scotland, then I think that there will be an assumption that that wholesaler will sell the product in Scotland. So there is guidance being developed which will help companies to understand how to collect that data and then report it. So it is going to be a tricky area, but it is one that is coming in the future. So there's a little bit more time for you to explore the routes that products take from you, and to start gathering data. And it is something that we would be able to support with as well.
John Gregg also asks if it's likely to be scrapped. Your views on that?
It is. There are. Well, with somebody from DEFRA on this call, I would be reluctant to. So far, we have not seen elements of these reforms. It is a very large and complicated package of reforms. The simpler recycling that Aaron was explaining to us is one part of these reforms as well. And so far, the total package of reforms and change is being stuck to, because really it's by having all of these different elements in play that the performance of the UK on collection and recycling of packaging is expected to be able to be changed in the future. At the moment, a lot of what's happening is simply changing from an old system to a new system and getting producers to pay for collection of packaging from households. But once all elements of the system are in place, the expectation is that it will be much, much better placed than the old system to drive change and more volumes. So that's a long and complicated answer. Apologies. My hunch is that we aren't going to see elements of this scrapped. And although this is the nation data reporting is particularly frustrating for companies, I totally understand that, because it is really difficult to get that data and to report accurately in the way that you would want and expect to. But it is one important element that the devolved administrations have asked for in order for there to be one set of regulations and one system for the UK. And for me, and I think I can see you nodding, Nigel, a single UK system for extended producer responsibility for packaging, for electricals, for waste, for any of those regimes, a single UK system is something that we have always advocated for on behalf of producers, because the nightmare is that the different countries splinter off into different requirements, different ways of counting, and yet more administrative burden and headache. So keep watching this space. Further delay possible, scrapping, I wouldn't put any money on it.
Okay, obviously politics at play there. Right, a few people are asking about how you work out how many tons of packaging you're putting on the market. I'll just read a couple of them. Mark Sayers of 𝗃𝗀𝘀𝗕𝗜𝗏 is asking, how many sales by unit quantity would a typical lighting company need to sell to meet the lower EPR threshold? Anonymous, do you have any practical observations on how a seller can understand if he handles more than 25 tons of packaging? What's the best source of info to assess this? So generally people are asking how much. Presumably you've got to have an idea of how much your packaging weighs, John.
Yep, that's right. And our data team provide a range of support services all the way down through to going onto a site, unboxing and weighing the packaging in its different elements if needed. That is one way that you can do this, and it is legitimate. The another approach, of course, is to reach back down your supply chain and obtain that data, and that's another approach that we can take on, is to approach your suppliers and obtain the necessary data in the right format that we can then apply to your sales units.
I mean, to do mental arithmetic, if you're doing 25 tons a year, it's a ton a week, it's 200 kilos a day. You know, if a luminaire, depending on the size, is between a cardboard box would be between half a kilo and 2 or 3 kilos. So you about a couple of hundred luminaires a day would be a rough rule of thumb. Is my maths okay, Nigel?
It sounds very logical to me, Ray. I'd probably prefer to have a spreadsheet and a calculator beside me prior to confirming that. But that is the sort of simple rule of thumb at least companies need to start doing. But actually, they do need to calculate the numbers correctly. But at least a rule.
Cardboard is surprisingly heavy. It's surprising once you put it on you know.
Yeah. And with the pallets, if products are arriving on pallets and pallets are encased in shrink wrap, there is potentially significant additional packaging there that can soon, as you say, Ray, can soon add up. A very crude, of course, if you're already reporting the waste electrical element, a very crude approximation would be if you have a shipping weight, would be to deduct from that the weight of electricals that you know is in that, and then you would have an approximation for the packaging weight. But remember, what you would be looking at there would be simply the consumer packaging, and that would not be catching the transit and shipment packaging, which is caught by the scope of the reporting for packaging.
Okay. Here's Caroline Armstrong is asking a question which I think applies to a lot of people, I would say. She says, we produce approximately 7 tons of waste each year, which I believe means we are not required to report. However, we're owned by a company in Sweden, which has 6 other businesses in the UK. Each businesses are not related other than they're owned by the same parent company. Does this have an effect on us as a business? Do I need to be doing anything else?
Well, the first kind of warning phrase there is produce waste per year. And I think the important thing here, and apologies if I didn't labor the point in the presentation, is that this isn't to do with how much waste is produced from your site. It's a very common misunderstanding that companies come up with. This is to do just the analogy would be in with waste electricals. You have to report not the amount of waste lights, lamps, which you might dispose of from your warehouse, but the total amount that you place on the market in the UK. And it's exactly the same with packaging. What you have to report and what these thresholds are based on is the total amount of packaging that you place on the market. Sometimes it's called handle because, of course, you might not be placing that a pallet or shrink wrap on the market. So packaging handled is the concept to try and look at. So with that clarification, and apologies if that wasn't clear enough in my earlier presentation, the aspect in relation to multiple companies in the UK is slightly complicated. It is possible under the regulations to report as a group, and that can be a cheaper option, but it is not a requirement to report as a group. And it's possible for some members of a group to report as a group, and then for other elements of the group to report separately. So you'd be very welcome to contact us and talk to our team, who know the hundreds of different questions which companies have over what are, as we've already found, different concepts and tricky things to understand and then to apply to your business to make sure that you are compliant.
But the rule of thumb is it's an individual limited company is who it's really targeted at, because it's not uncommon for lighting companies to have 2 or 3 sister companies in the same, operating from the same building.
Yes, and the requirement would apply to each company individually, but I believe will also apply to them as a group of companies. So I think I'm not so expert on this, so it is worth checking, and perhaps that's something that when we have a debrief afterwards, I'll contact one of my experts and we can come back with a clarification on that. I would much rather we did that than me get it wrong.
Okay. Some people are a couple of things about the reuse of packaging, cardboard, reuse of pallets. Anonymous is saying with PERP is packaging referring only to things we dispose of, e.g., we reuse boxes to send out products. Are these in scope as we self-manage the waste by recycling directly? Kevin Milliken is saying, reusing pallets, do we need to start weighing empty pallets? So reuse is the question there.
Reuse is accommodated for within the regulations. There are more, there are way more companies caught by the packaging regulations than either the WEEE or the batteries regulations. And so what I can assure you is that your situation and your question, although it could be puzzling, is unlikely to be unique and unlikely to have not occurred before. So there are vast amounts of detail within the regulations as to how pallets, because pallets sometimes are reused and sometimes they're not, how they should be counted, who should be counting them and reporting them, and all of these different types of aspects. And I think that the reuse of cardboard would come under the self-managed waste, but again, I'm not sure exactly how that would be treated.
Okay, well, presumably you should keep track of the percentage of the stuff you're reusing.
It's of course it's helpful to do that, or to have some estimated basis for how much is being reused.
Miriam East is asking, our suppliers are already reporting their data, so I assume that that does not add to our data.
I think, yes, I think she's meaning suppliers
Yes.
in the UK. In the UK,
Yes.
already reporting, and then they are then buying and then selling on.
Correct. I think that's what she's getting at.
Again, it's worth looking at the regulations to check that because the different activities that you perform are covered by the regulations, because again, the way that packaging moves through the system in the UK is complicated, with many movements of packaging from one company to another, and the regulations again are experienced with all of that and have established rules as to who should be reporting what and where the obligation should sit. So it is worth, I think, checking and not just assuming that that they are registered and therefore you don't need to.
Isn't it the thinking that everyone is a producer? So if you're a wholesaler and you get in boxed items and you send them out the other side of the door, you're still putting that tonnage on the market or packaging.
Yes, depending on if you are importing, then you are definitely placing that on the market. If you are buying from a company in the UK and then selling to another company within the UK, then it's likely that the packaging element would be any packaging that you add.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you don't want to double count a cardboard box, basically.
Absolutely, very important that the system doesn't double count.
Okay.
But equally important that the system, that everybody within the system is counting the same things in the same way and is capturing as clearly as possible the total data for the amount of packaging being placed on the market in the UK.
Okay. An anonymous question says, for John, Part of our business is direct to other OEMs, so in terms of we don't report this part of our sales as we aren't deemed to be the producer. Does the same apply to packaging? I.e., would we only include the weight of the packaging we use for our own brands in our calculation?
Another technical distinction. I think I would what I'll do is take these out of the chat and then make sure that we get a response on these from my team of experts.
That's a good idea. So we'll basically take several of these questions where there's a bit more clarification needed, John. We'll ask your team to come up with some responses, and then when Suzanne sends the information out to everybody, we'll be able to put in those more detailed responses with perhaps with links where possible.
Absolutely, and hopefully those will be helpful to multiple companies, and save a deluge of checks, but the offer remains there, that if this is a topic that you are needing some additional explanation about, then there are resources on our website, but there are a huge amount of expertise and resources within our team.
One delegate is saying, I heard a wholesaler say that they should not have to register if others have registered and pay in their supply chain. Can you just outline why they must also do this?
I will take that back and reply, because some of these can be, there are exceptions. There are companies who don't need to register, but I would rather not, on the spur of the moment and the call, provide an answer on that one.
Yeah, it sounds like that we need special clarification for distributors and wholesalers, and
yes,
I excuse the expression, to any whole, box shifting, where you're getting it coming in one side of the warehouse and going out the other side. So yeah, just a story that we covered last year is that in France, they are moving to ban polystyrene for packaging, and Lighting Europe, the trade body, has been looking for clarification, seeking to delay that, and on behalf of its members. Do we know what the position is in the UK?
It is talked of in the UK, and there are certainly representations from a number of organisations, including some of our members, to government to explain the important role that polystyrene plays in the packaging of certain products, and the difficulty of finding a really viable alternative. And organisations with large volumes of polystyrene can find it, arising at their sites, can find it beneficial to compact, and once compacted, it is a valuable material, can be recycled, and it has a value. The challenge, of course, is that the reason it's so brilliant for packaging some items is its extreme lightweight, and therefore compaction is key. And the business case for putting a compactor in is it means you need a lot of volume.
Okay, good.
Is there anything? Is Aaron able to come in on that at all?
I'm not. I'm afraid it's not something that I cover in Simple Recycling.
Okay, thank you.
Nigel, on online marketplaces, can you just clarify for us, if you're a Chinese company selling out of China, on Amazon, on all Amazon geographies, you're selling into the UK with a panel or whatever, presumably that company isn't going to sign up to a WEEE scheme or anything. It's Amazon are going to load it with a fee. Either they add it on top or they take it from their slice, and that would be paid into the WEEE pot in the UK. That's my understanding of how that will work. Is that correct?
Exactly, and it's actually different from the approach that's taken in, for example, Germany. So in Germany, the company in China has to register itself with the German authorities, and so there's been a huge increase in the number of registered companies in Germany. That's not the approach being taken in the UK. In the UK, it's the online marketplace's duty to register and report, and so basically the suppliers outside of the UK are just taken out of the equation entirely. It's simply that the online marketplace has to collate, aggregate, and report the data for any product supplied or where the supply is facilitated by their system.
Okay. It does seem if you're a Chinese supplier, it seems quite complicated. If you've got to register for WEEE regulations and all these all across these geographies, it must be. I can't see that happening, frankly.
Quite challenging.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Which is why actually I think actually the approach in the UK is actually quite a pragmatic, sensible approach, because for the Environment Agency, they're having to enforce on a few dozen organizations rather than tens of thousands.
Yeah. So it means those companies are contributing to their WEEE, even if they don't know it, even if it's going by. It's happening. So
correct. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, well we've dealt with all the questions so far. So is there any other takeaways or any other advice you would like to give to any of our audience?
I think on the simple recycling side, I would just really encourage you to have a conversation with your waste collector. They'll be able to provide specific advice on your circumstances. You might find that you're already compliant, and if not, they'll be able to advise on the services they provide. Or it might be that they don't provide all the waste services, in which case they can encourage you to contact other waste collectors for the services that you will need to add. So, for example, food waste.
And John, if anybody's any queries, they should contact you guys.
Absolutely, yes. And as I think has already been clear, I'm a generalist running a team of more than 50 specialists. So we'd be very happy to support with further advice and assistance if that helps.
Okay, good. Right, we'll wrap up there. Our next webinar is on the 15th of May at 11 o'clock. Register via recolight.co.uk and follow the links. We're looking at designing sustainable luminaires. How do you come up with luminaires that match the eco design legislation that's coming along? That are repairable, replaceable, upgradable, and all that type of thing. And we've some great speakers. So that is on the 15th of May, and you register free again on the website. And it just remains me to thank Nigel, John, and Aaron for their very insightful presentations today. Much appreciated. Thank you, guys.
And let me add my thanks to Aaron and John, and also to Ray for hosting and chairing the event, and for Suzanne for being the brains behind the tech.
Good stuff. And the slides will be on email either later today or tomorrow. Check your spam, and we'll also get the video will be loaded onto our is it a YouTube channel? No, it'll be on. But you get through it via recolight.co.uk. Great. We should see you all on the 15th of May.
Thank you.